this has been with me for, I've had it for close to 30 years now. And I just brought it along to kind of help me illustrate a bit about the folk process and as a prop and stuff. So, and if it, it's gone through a hell of a lot of miles with me. And if it could talk, would probably tell you quite a few things that I might not want you to know. Anyway, I'll come back to that. The folk process is basically, it's about how cultural artifacts are changed over time and how basically when they change their culture at the same time. And so, you think, well, what's a cultural artifact? And basically, it's like this. If I tell you a joke, and I say, I tell you a joke and you laugh at it and you like it, and you take the joke and you decide, okay, I'm going to tell it, and you pass it along. So you basically change it a bit. You put your own spin on it. And the joke goes around, and eventually, maybe it'll come back to me. And I'll hear the joke again. And it's changed. It's the same joke, it's recognizable, but it's different. And that's, in a nutshell, that's the folk process. It's how we change things. We sing songs over periods of time, and they change a bit. And it applies to anything that's changeable, stories or any kind of what we might term intellectual property. And as it changes, as these things change, they actually change our culture. They change the world we live in little tiny ways, but they all add up together. And so the reason these are important, that the folk process itself is important, is because this is the wellspring from which we draw our ideas. You might call it the commons or the public domain or the public sphere, but it's what makes our world vibrant and interesting, and it's what renews our culture. Constantly, it's reborn every day. It's always in the process of being reborn, and we've gone through, say, about 100 years now, about the 20th century and now into the 21st, where we have gone into a sort of a frantic copyright mode where we essentially remove things from this public sphere. And the folk process itself is strangled to a huge extent. And I'll talk about that in a bit. I was a saddle maker for a long time in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that's in the States, it's not in Mexico. And I sort of made the tools of the cowboy trade. And as I was doing that, basically I appropriated designs and ideas from existing works, from saddle makers that went before me, or even from contemporary ones. And so this is a sort of folk process kind of thing, but essentially I'm just basically stealing this design. I'm going to put it on my saddle. I'm going to steal the idea of putting corner conchos on this saddle of mine. And saddle makers do that. Anybody that makes anything creative does it to an extent. When I was in my shop making something, I knew that when that thing was finished, whether it was a saddle or belt or whatever, bridles and all of this kind of stuff, I knew that I no longer, when it left my shop door, I no longer had any control over the design, over my intellectual property. It was gone. It was out there, gone. It's what you are when you're a saddle maker. You make stuff, you put it out there, and then it's in the world, and you don't have control over your intellectual property anymore. Somebody can take it, dye it, change it, resell it. It's the way it is. As I got into the fashion industry, which I sort of stumbled into it. It's a long story, I won't go there, but I stumbled into doing stuff for designers and also for my own self, I discovered that Designers do the same thing. I like the pocket on that shirt. I'm going to go ahead and put it on this new design of mine. It's very common. So I would take, say, in this thing, I would take that buckle, which is actually a buckle off of a set of hames on a harness. It's a horse collar. It buckles the hames to the collar, and I made that belt for Donna Karan. So this sort of folk process thing you start to draw from different worlds and tie them together. And again, that's what makes our world interesting, just little things like that. And as I worked, I realized that these designs, you make them, you put them out there, and they're gone, and then you just keep doing this. But at the same time, I was borrowing from other sources and copying parts of these designs from other Navajos would maybe stamp sterling like that, but that's me. That's not a Navajo doing that. And I thought about hundreds of this has been going on for hundreds of years, and in fact, composers like Bach and Handel and even Mozart borrowed from other composers. It's the way they composed. Bach would take and transpose entire pieces by Vivaldi, concertos, and then he would transpose them note for note and then pull out little bits and use them in his pieces. And that was not, today that's considered piracy, remixing, but that's the way they composed. For many, hundreds of years really. It was really only in the latter part of the 20th century that we really started strangling that sort of thing and vilifying people who did it. And now it's kind of unthinkable to do that. I'm going to take the line out of this guy's song and stick it in mine. Anyway, this kind of stuff, it's what I did. I basically kind of did fashion and saddlery and all this kind of stuff, rock star stuff. And I would be 1 minute making this fancy stuff, another minute doing things like this, hand stitching a buckle shape on a set of circingle on a set of harness, And one day, in this sort of mode, I got a call from this guy, a guy named Isaac Mizrahi. And I didn't know who he was. I was just some yahoo saddle maker out in the middle of nowhere. And he allowed us how he was a designer, and that his friend Donna Karan had sort of sung my praises to him and said, look, he would be the guy that would make he wanted me to make bustiers. And so I talked to him for a while. He was a really nice guy, and I had no idea that he was probably one of the most important designers in the world. But I figured, well, if Donna says I can do it, I probably can, And finally I stopped him after a while and I said, by the way, what's a bustier? And so he kindly explained it. He said it was one of these brassiere things that, that Madonna wears. And so, then I kind of figured it out, and I said, oh, well, I'll tell you, those have to be hand fit. And he was fine with that. So in working with people like Isaac and them in the fashion industry, I realized that it was a lot like my trade as a saddle maker, in that they tend to make things and let them go. They don't worry too much about people ripping off their design. They don't want people knocking them off, in other words, putting their name on them and selling them as an Isaac Mizrahi thing. They don't want that. But they don't mind them if they take the dress from last season and copy it and sell it as, in a different line, because they're too busy being on to the next thing. You don't see those kinds of lawsuits in the fashion industry. And by the way, it's one of the most healthy industries in the world. It's a huge industry. And they have very little copyright litigation, considering the amount of money that's spent. And so finally, I would end up doing things like this, making these bustiers for, like Naomi Campbell here, or Cher, or whoever they were for, and women who at the time I was thought of as like cowboy fashionistas, cowgirl fashionistas, I guess. Anyway, this bag here, you could say that it was designed by Hermès, which is an outfit in Paris. It's a family-run, the best leather work in the world, and they've been around for almost 200 years. You could say that this is a Hermès bag. You'd be partially correct. I made this bag, and that's a Hermès bag. That's a Birkin bag, Jane Birkin. That bag probably cost between $15,000 and $25,000. It's a beautiful piece of work. You can see that I stole the design for this bag from that bag. I basically, I appropriated it's the handles and the way the flap works and all that. And I did this thing that Bach and them would have called transformational imitation, which means, and it's a real term that means, you're going to transform this thing, you're going to imitate it, but you're going to move it forward and renew it and make something new out of it. That's what I did. And so I put my own work into it. I, carved it. But up here, I hand-stitched the handle shapes the same way that Hermès did. The handles are similar, but I carved it, and it's a different kind of leather, and it's a different sort of thing. I put my own maker's stamp on it. So guess what? I get credit for this. I get credit for this design. And but you're not going to mistake this for this. You can see the roots of that bag in that. But they're not the same bag. It's not the same thing. And copyright protection these days seeks to keep me from making that because it's too much like that. And it also does the same thing with music and literature and everything else. I played music for many years, all my life really. Well, not yet, I haven't. But at the same time I was doing that, playing music, bands, playing with artists. I'm a sideman. I play a lot of instruments, recording, all that sort of stuff. And classical people would probably call me a collaborative, what would it be? A collaborative accompanist. But basically I'm a picker, I'm a sideman. And we do this as sort of a work for hire. And in some ways, it's much like saddle making, because musicians who do a work for hire, studio musicians, sidemen, we don't get paid. It's not about the pay. A person who's playing with an artist on stage, the artist is getting many times much more money than the person playing right alongside him. Same in the studio. That's fine. That's the way it should be. But we work as a work for hire. And that's a lot like making saddles in some ways, where you create something. I create my part in the studio, and I do it, and it's my intellectual property. It's content that I thought up and did, but I give it away as soon as I lay down that track and finish getting paid or whatever and leave. It's no longer mine. I have no control over it, and that's the way it is. And so during the course of this, I realized that I spent a lot more time protecting the intellectual content of the songs I write than I did ever protecting the content, the intellectual sort of copyright on something like this. A song doesn't take anywhere near the 80 to 100 hours that this takes to make. yet we're really precious about them. In a lot of ways, rightly so. And so I didn't think for many years about this shrinking the public sphere, the public domain, the commons. I didn't think about the fact that it was slowly shrinking as copyrights move out and out and out. It shrinks. So we have sort of less and less to draw from. And this is very important, folks. This idea that, we can't download anything, we can't do this, we can't do that. It's unthinkable to give away your music or give away anything. It's really not unthinkable. In the digital age, it's going to be more common than not. But we're in a transitional period, and we're going to have to get used to it. And so, one more prop I want to show you is my book. It's my saddle making book. Let's see if I have pictures of it here. It's called What I Know About Saddle Making by John Egenes. It's a big old, heavy, thick, hundreds of pages. You get a lot for your money here. I sell it by the pound. So, and here's the thing. On the title page, it has this thing that says, "The mind is a blank page, waiting for the teacher to write upon it." This is by John Locke. It's a quote from John Locke. And to go along with that, the book itself is, blank pages. They're just blank. And then at the end, the dedication is dedicated to those who taught me everything I know. But the fact is that the irony is, this is protected by copyright. And I kind of wanted to make that point because when people are thinking about the idea that, okay, my music or my film or something is going to get copied and plastered all over the internet for free, and there's this huge abundance. When we have abundance of things, guess what happens in capitalism? It becomes worthless. And so I can't make a living. That's a concern. But basically, I think about this. I think that for me, instead of following basically old roads of trying to protect everything, I look for basically new avenues to go down. And I think essentially that it's an artist's job to bring beauty into the world. That's what an artist is supposed to do, whatever way they do it. And in doing so, basically I think I need to give myself permission to draw upon other things in order to create my work, as well as allow people to copy my work, So basically, the things I made, the saddles and stuff, are basically designs that are out there in the world, and the designs I feel like they're out there. Somebody is okay. It's not okay to take this bag and say you made it, but it's okay to copy it into something that's transformational imitation, something that you move it forward, and something that becomes. I would hope that the stuff that I've made, music or bags or whatever they are, enriches our culture just a little bit, just a bit, like that. Now, I'm not so sure it's the bustier that's really the enriching part of that. So I'll say, in closing, I'll say this to musicians and people who create what we call content, intellectual content or property. And that's this. I'll quote Tim O'Reilly, or paraphrase him anyway, who said that basically piracy is not your enemy. Piracy isn't your enemy. Obscurity is. And so for me, when I think about my work, I think that abundance, too much of it, abundance is not my enemy. Scarcity is. And that'll do it for me. Thank you very much for having me.